Hey, my name is Matt. We're in the Rockies. Today I'm in Washington, D.C. What I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to give you some tips as I travel around Washington, D.C. As they come to mind at different places, I'll give you some tips for your next vacation to D.C. So number one is I'm standing right here next to the Washington Monument. Number one is to make sure to get tickets to go to the top of this thing. It is really a must-do when you come here. Tickets cost $1, but you just have to get them on recreation.gov. But once you get to the top, you'll be able to see all around the city. It's the tallest structure in the city. You'll be able to see the Lincoln Memorial, the Jefferson Memorial, the White House, and the Capitol building. This is a must-do. Okay, tip number two is to understand what the mall is. I've been around Washington, D.C. quite a bit, and I just take it for granted that people know what the mall is. I kind of forget sometimes. So, and they thought it was a store. So, a shopping center. So this is the mall. This is a big grassy area that down there you can see the Capitol building, and then it extends all the way to the other end. Here's the monument, the Washington Monument behind me, but clear down there is the Lincoln Memorial. This whole area is just a big grassy area surrounded by museums and filled with monuments. It is a big, huge park. It's a public ground. It's, I believe, managed by the National Park Service. You can come here, you can run, you can bike, you can play sports in the big grassy areas, and then you can visit all these cool free museums and free monuments. That is the National Mall. So understand what the mall is. Tip 4 and 5 in this video. So behind me is Ford's Theater. So you want to make sure to get tickets to Ford's Theater before you come. You will enter in right there. They'll take you into, this is the theater where Abraham Lincoln was shot and killed. You'll go into the theater for a presentation. You'll go down to the basement to a museum. And then behind me here, this is the house where Lincoln was taken when he was shot, and this is where he died. And next door is kind of a little museum and bookstore. So there are 4 parts to this tour: the theater, the basement museum, the house that he died in, and the museum for the house that he died in. So four parts. Okay, so that's tip number 4. Tip number 5 is to pack a disposable poncho. It rains quite a bit in Washington, D.C. We've been wearing this all morning, and it has been a lifesaver. So get an umbrella or a disposable poncho. 2 more tips for you here. I think we're on 7 and 8, if I remember right. So maybe from here on, I'll just say the next tip because I can't remember what number we're on. But this behind me is the National Archives. And so my next tip is to make sure to get a ticket to go see the National Archives. They have the 3 documents called the Charters of Freedom. This is the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. And then the next tip here is scooters. Okay, there are many scooter companies in Washington, D.C. There's Lime, Bird, Spin, and Lyft, I believe. They're all over the place. They're just all over. So you need to download all the apps, set up your accounts so that you can ride them when you find them, because they really do help you get around the city faster. It is a lot of walking in Washington, D.C., and these really help you out. Hey, the next tip is to remember that all the Smithsonian museums are free. So this is the Natural History Museum behind me, and basically all the museums here in Washington, D.C. are free. There's a few that you have to pay for, but the big ones, the main ones, are free. Makes this a much more affordable vacation than you'd realize. Tip number 6 is to wear some good shoes to walk in, because you're gonna do a lot of walking in Washington, D.C. Okay, I'm standing here in front of the Air and Space Museum, the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. So my next tip is to understand that you can't see everything in one vacation in Washington, D.C. I've been visiting here so many times, and I still just went to a few new places today at the Natural History Museum. So you just have to kind of pick out a few spots. It would be a good idea to pull up the museums online beforehand and look at what areas you might be interested in. But then also just go with the flow and see what you like and what your kids are interested in and all that stuff. And just know you're not going to see everything. Hey there, I'm standing in front of the Ulysses S. Grant statue, and behind me is the Capitol building. So my next tip is to make sure you book a tour of the Capitol building with your local congressman or woman. And you have to do that usually about a month or more in advance, so you can contact them usually online and make sure to to book a tour there. It's really a great experience. The inside of the building is beautiful. They love getting people from home, so they're really excited to give you a tour, so there you go. Okay, so I am standing here by the Ulysses S. Grant statue. So my next tip is to just brush up a little bit on American history before you come to Washington, D.C. And the best resource I could give you for that, that's watchable and educational, is Khan Academy, Khan Academy. That guy does a great job of making things easy to understand. And so, you know, you don't need to become a teacher or anything like that, or get your degree in history, but I would say brush up a little bit so you kind of know who some of these people are. Ulysses S. Grant, a Civil War hero, a president of the United States, and it's just a little bit more enjoyable when you know who they are. Okay, the next step, or the next tip, is to learn how to ride the metro. And when you're riding the metro, when you're doing the escalators, you have to stand on the right and let people walk on the left, or the locals will get really angry with you. Okay, next tip is to make sure to get some variety on your Washington, D.C. vacation. So seeing monuments, seeing the museums are why you go to D.C. Those are obviously a big part of it. But it helps to spice it up a little bit, or get a little variety here. So tonight we're attending a baseball game, the Washington Nationals against the Colorado Rockies. If you do go to a baseball game, make sure to get here early and you can watch them take batting practice and maybe catch some home run balls. Okay, my next tip is that when you visit Washington, D.C., don't forget about Mount Vernon here behind me. This is George Washington's home. It's a half-hour away from downtown Washington, D.C., but well worth the detour, well worth the cost of admission. Make sure you visit Washington's home if you visit Washington, D.C. Next tip is to know that Gettysburg is not that far away from Washington, D.C. So here I'm sitting next to my buddy Abe Lincoln, and we are at Gettysburg National Battlefield. It's only about an hour and a half away from Washington, D.C., so worth the trip up here. It takes about 3 hours maybe to see the battlefield if you do kind of a quick job at it. Okay, my next tip is don't forget about Baltimore. So I know you don't go to Washington, D.C. to go visit Baltimore, but if you're in D.C., only an hour away is Fort McHenry, which is where the Star-Spangled Banner was written. It's a really cool stop. And then Baltimore also has the Inner Harbor area, which is a great place to just walk around right there by the ocean, and lots of shops, street performers, and things like that. So it's really worth a day or a half a day to go stop at Fort McHenry in the Inner Harbor at Baltimore. Okay, the next tip is to understand that the monuments are on one side of the National Mall and the museums are on the other side, generally speaking. There are monuments all over Washington, D.C., but the main monuments that you think of, like behind me here is the World War II Memorial, there's the Lincoln Memorial, Washington Monument, Jefferson, Franklin Roosevelt, Martin Luther King, Vietnam, Korea. Those are mostly on the west side of the mall. And the museums, the Smithsonian museums, like the Air and Space, the American History, Natural History, those are on the the east side of the mall, as well as the Capitol is over there. So just kind of break that down a little bit with the National Mall to help you out. Okay, my next tip for you is to think about the symbolism at the monuments. So I'm here at the Vietnam Memorial right now, and notice the reflection that you can see some people in the wall behind me here. There's something to that as you look into the wall and see yourself. There's a list of names on the wall. These are all the people that died during the Vietnam War. And there's just always some symbolism with these monuments because artists create them and they are giving you an interpretation of what they're creating. This is a V, kind of a V shape, and that wall right there goes down and points to the Washington Monument. And then this wall that's right next to me goes on and points to the Lincoln Memorial. So you can study a little bit about these beforehand or just make your own interpretations. That's one thing that we had a fun time here doing with my friends is we just see what we got out of the monument or the memorial. You know, what can you get out of it? So that's the fun thing.
The higher you go, even into the indentions of the
pants,
right,
and the suit.
Right.
Okay, my next tip is to use a variety of transportation methods to get around. The mall is huge. It doesn't look that big, it's very deceiving, but it is really big. We've done 13 miles of walking one day. So I have used scooters like I've got here, bikes, metro, Uber, walking. I mean, just about everything. And we rented a car even. So you kind of have to have a game plan to use a variety of methods to get around to make the most of your time. Okay, I'm here at the Jefferson Memorial, and so my next tip is to be quiet and be respectful when you are at some of these memorials. They're real kind of reverent, sacred places. It's really interesting. Last time we had our kids with us and we were trying to keep them down a little bit because everybody just had these real hushed tones and they were whispering and stuff. So pay your respects. Okay, here's the next tip is when you ride the metro, you need to look at what the last station on the line is. Say right now we are going from the Smithsonian over to Arlington Cemetery. But we're gonna go on the one that says Francona Springfield. So you have to look at the last line. That'll tell you where you're going. Okay, 2 more tips about the metro. First of all, it's called the metro, not a subway. All the locals call it a metro, so that's just the way it is. I love the metro. It's so easy to get around. It's really well done. It's clean. It is awesome. The metro is a great way to get around. The other thing is, it's common courtesy not to talk on your phone in the metro. And I'm in an empty car right now, so I'm kind of talking on my phone here, but it's common courtesy not to. My final tip is to watch our DC playlist to get you excited and prepared for your trip to Washington, D.C. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.